A very good afternoon, everyone who has joined us this afternoon. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you to this webinar that we are doing in partnership with the World Health Organization, dealing with mental health this afternoon. As indicated on our invitation, we are hosting this webinar to explore African responses to suicide prevention. This is done as part of efforts in African countries to advocate for the decriminalisation of suicide and suicide attempts. I would like to also extend warmest welcome to our esteemed panelists who have taken their time to unpack our theme this afternoon. They are going to be introduced a bit later on by our facilitator. As indicated, we believe that this is an extremely essential conversation to have in the context of supporting mental health. According to a World Health Organization, mental health is a basic human right that is vital to personal, community, as well as socioeconomic development. This webinar takes place at a time when there is a greater emphasis on mental health around the world. There has also been a greater emphasis on our continent, particularly because so many parts of our continent lag behind in promoting mental health. It is a sad reality that in certain of our communities, mental health issues remain a taboo and also are frequently associated with superstitious practices such as witchcraft. As a result, we value the mental health advocacy done by various organizations across the continent. By hosting this webinar, we are also contributing to such efforts as a University of KwaZulu-Natal. As such, UKZN as one of the premier universities in the continent, we really recognize our obligation to contribute to and also lead discussions about development in our continent. As a result, we are delighted to host such discussions aimed at finding African solutions to African problems. This is consistent with our objective to be the premier University of African Scholarship. We are grateful that today we have a highly decorated panel of speakers and academics who will give insights on this important topic. I am now going to hand over and obviously leave you in the capable hands of our facilitator and moderator, Professor John Glaba, who's actually the professor of social work in the School of Applied Human Sciences at this University of KwaZulu-Natal, and he's also the regional vice president Africa of the World Federation for Mental Health. Prof, over to you, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We've got people joining us here on this webinar, and also people who are joining us who are joining us on YouTube and watching it live on YouTube. Thank you so much. I hope you are going to participate fully in this webinar this afternoon. Thank you so much. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Ms. Zondo, for that introduction and opening remarks. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening from South Africa and all over the world, particularly in Africa. We'll bring you warm greetings from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. As Ms. Zondo said, I am Professor Johannes John Langba. I'm a professor of social work and the current regional vice president for Africa for the World Federation for Mental Health. The World Federation for Mental Health is a member organization. It's global. It is as old as the World Health Organization. In fact, we are celebrating the 75th anniversary of the founding of the World Federation for Mental Health this year. So this webinar could not have come at a better time. In that regard, the president of the World Federation for Mental Health has kindly obliged to send a message to everyone in Africa about this very important webinar that is discussing a very timely issue. The president of the World Federation for Mental Health, the current president, is Dr. Nasser Losa. He's an African, an Egyptian who has been the president for the organization for the last 2 years. He sends his warm regards and well wishes through a message that we're going to play now.
Good afternoon to you, to my dear friend, Professor Johannes John Lamba, and dear panelists. Thank you so much for inviting me to be with you today in this important webinar. This collaboration with the University of KwaZulu-Natal and the World Federation for Mental Health is actually quite an important step in our campaign for the 2023 Mental Health Day. The topic that you've chosen today on decriminalization of suicide and suicide attempts in Africa is an important one. One would have hoped that by 2023, it wasn't needed anymore to tell our policymakers that you can't criminalize suicide. It's such a desperate act where our individuals need our support and need our compassion, something that apparently seems to be a little bit lacking nowadays. And so thank you for choosing that topic. Now that we're celebrating 75 years of the World Federation for Mental Health, and our topic of 2023 being mental health as a human right, universally that is, surely one of the basic human rights is for our societies, communities, policymakers to appreciate the pain and the saga that follows the suicidal ideation and the attempts and the actual successful suicides, not only by the individuals who attempted, but also by their carers and their families and societies. So thank you for choosing that topic. And it isn't surprising for us at the Federation that the region of Africa within the World Federation for Mental Health remains one of the more active ones. So thank you all for inviting me today, and thank you, Johannes, for organizing this. Have a successful webinar.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to go on record to thank Dr. Losa for taking time off his busy schedule at the 11th hour to send us this message. As I said earlier on, we are celebrating the 75th anniversary of the World Federation for Mental Health, and we are all very, very busy. And the Secretary General of the organization, Dr. Gabriel Ijibaro, also had wanted to send a message, but he couldn't send the message, and he sent his apologies. But and Dr. Ijibaro is a Nigerian who is based in London, who is the Secretary General. The Secretariat of the World Federation is based in the UK, in London. So he wanted to send his message as an African to us and grace this occasion, but he couldn't. But all is not lost. The immediate past president of the World Federation for Mental Health is a South African based in Cape Town, Dr. Ingrid Daniels, who was obliged to say a few words on behalf of the Secretary General about the World Federation of Mental Health and the 75th anniversary. I will now call on Dr. Ingrid Daniels to say a few words. Is Dr. Daniels in the room? Otherwise, I think when she joins, she was say a few words. I would save some time for her to say a few. It's important that one of the either the Secretary General or the immediate past president say a few words about this important issue that we are trying to explore in this webinar. I'll go to the next item, which is for me to give an opening remark about, the concepts that we developed and why we are doing this and the purpose of the webinar. So I want to thank you all for joining us for a conversation that delves into the criminalization of suicide and suicide attempts in Africa and the concomitant implications for suicide prevention, human rights, and dignity. And we have dignity there because, as you would know, all of us are Africans, and especially in countries where suicide is still criminalized. Right? Some of these legislations are legislations we inherited from our colonial folks, and we've not, done justice to it to try to look at it from a critical point of view to try to amend some of these laws that we actually inherited. And the dignity part of it, I mean, the human rights is straightforward. Dignity is in this title because in most countries that criminalize suicide, believe it or not, because it's criminalized, right? If you attempt to take your own life, you are arrested, like you are breaking the law. And if you take your own life and you commit suicide, it might not be implemented or enforced currently, but there is a law, they can enforce it. If you commit suicide, you can be buried with a handcuff because you've broken the law. And that's where the dignity comes, because every human being deserves some amount of dignity, even when they are dead. Notwithstanding the fact that they had problems with their mental health. So did you know that suicide was the 4th leading cause of death among 15 to 29-year-olds globally in 2019? That was before even COVID. The recent statistics must have even increased because of COVID. Did you know that an estimated 77% of global suicides occurred in low and middle income countries, including Africa? Did you also know that there are at least 23 countries globally that still criminalize suicide and suicide attempts? And the majority of these countries are African countries. Well, there is a plethora of evidence that points to the fact that the criminalization of suicide nurtures a culture that fosters blame towards individuals that attempt suicide and deters them from seeking timely professional help due to the stigma and fear and the legal repercussions. It is important to note that suicide is not a mental health condition, but some people with mental health conditions may be at greater risk. Suicide is reportedly linked to multiple complex, intersecting social, economic, cultural, and psychological factors and challenges, including the denial of basic human rights and access to resources. Traumatic and other stressful life events, such as loss of livelihood, work or academic pressures, for those of us that are in school, relationship breakdowns, and discrimination, to name a few, are known risk factors for suicidal ideation and suicide attempts. And suicide is an outcome. I would therefore like to take this opportunity to remind African governments that reducing the global suicide rate by 1/3 by 2030 is a target of both the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and the World Health Organization's Comprehensive Mental Health Action Plan. The purpose, therefore, of this webinar is to examine policy, practice, and legal responses to suicide prevention in Africa in an effort to advocate for the decriminalization of suicide and suicide attempts in African countries. So the webinar would examine the critical steps that African governments can take in their efforts to prevent suicide, suicide attempts, and suicidal ideation, particularly among young people. The webinar will also examine the development and implementation of comprehensive national strategies for the prevention of suicide, particularly among persons identified at increased risk of suicide, including persons with mental conditions in Africa. Therefore, I would like to introduce our esteemed panel of experts. But before I do that, I would like to state that one of the tasks of the WFMH Regional Vice President is to convene and chair a World Federation for Mental Health Regional Advisory Committee. I would therefore like to introduce the current WFMH Africa Regional Mental Health Advisory Committee that I convened in 2021. They include Dr. Ingrid Daniels, who is the immediate past president of the World Federation for Mental Health, who's based in South Africa. And colleagues, if you can just, if you're in the room, turn on your camera so they can see your face. You deserve this kind of introduction for the work you've been doing behind the scenes in the last 2 years. Next, I would like to introduce Ms. Saibatu Mansare from Sierra Leone. The next member is Mr. Michael Kamau Kairuki from Kenya. We have Mr. Gabriel Lungu from Zambia. Ms. Fehintola Ayodele from Nigeria. Dr. Kwanele Shishane from South Africa, based in the United Kingdom. Mr. Wilbrod Kabagambe from Uganda. Ms. Halima Nuruddin from Nigeria. And of course, myself as the chair of the committee. Thank you very much for the work that you've been doing behind the scenes and convening every month to discuss issues related to mental health in Africa. Now, I would like to introduce, if you can allow me, all of the panelists at once, so we could save time for the critical discussion on this timely issue. Again, thank you for taking time off your busy schedules to serve as panelists. We really appreciate it. Our first panelist that I'm going to introduce is Dr. Sanele Gamede, and panelists, if you can, if your video is not currently on, if you can just turn on your video and turn it off if you like. Dr. Gamede is a lecturer at the University of Johannesburg and an Africa award-winning strategic youth life and career coach who have successfully coached, spoken to, and provided career and life coaching to thousands of people since 2011. Next, I would like to introduce Dr. Carol Labour. Dr. Labour is a special advisor on mental health, a presidential appointment in the Ministry of Health of Sierra Leone, West Africa. She's the founder and principal consultant of Mind Health Africa and the vice chair of Africa CDC's Advisory Committee on Non-Communicable Diseases and Mental Health. Next, I would like to introduce Ms. Marufat Alabi. Ms. Alabi is a mental health nurse, clinical instructor, and a doctoral student in the Department of Nursing at the University of Ibadan, Nigeria. She's a D43 scholar and the Deputy Regional Coordinator of the ASIDO Foundation, a not-for-profit mental health organization based in Nigeria. Next, I would like to introduce Professor Joseph Asafo. Professor Asafo is a professor of clinical and health psychology and a leading suicidologist in Ghana, pioneering extensive research in attitudes towards suicide advocacy, and prevention. He is the immediate past head of Department of Psychology at the University of Ghana and the current acting director for the Center for Aging Studies, CAS, at the University of Ghana. Then we have Mr. Jude Mood Poku. Jude Poku is an education consultant at Techno Tutor. Jude is passionate about evolving global education systems. Mr. Gabriel Lungu is a mental health officer at the Ministry of Health in Zambia and a member of the World Federation for Mental Health Africa Advisory Committee. He's a CEO of X-Minds Solutions in Zambia, an online mental health service provider, and he is a mental health advocate. Last but not the least, I would like to introduce our own Dr. Angelina Stevens. Dr. Stevens is a psychologist and current manager of the Student Support Services in the College of Humanities at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. She's also an executive member of the Sexuality and Gender Division of the Psychological Society of South Africa, SSA. You agree with me that we have a panel that does not only contribute, but is multidisciplinary, represents the region, that is Africa, from east, west, north, and south. And we really look forward to an engaging discussion on this critical issue. Thank you very much. Now, I would want to ask that we just raise our hands and clap for the panelists. We are lucky to have them, and thank you very much for taking time again from your busy schedules to be here. So like I said earlier on, the panelists will explore issues around, the decriminalization of suicide and suicidal attempts in Africa, and what are some of the challenges for policy, legal, and practice. So I want to start with Dr. Gamede. Dr. Gamede.
Dr. Professor Johannes Langbaugh, I'm here. I'm not sure if you want me to share just a few words before you start, because I do have to rush off. I have a media appointment. So
thank you for interrupting. Fine. Yeah, because I was not seeing you. Yes, yeah. I said again, Dr. Ingrid Daniels is the CEO of Cape Mental Health in South Africa, based in Cape Town, and the immediate past president of the World Federation for Mental Health, an African. So as you can see, we currently have an African who is the current president, and we have the Secretary General who is an African, Nigerian, British, and we have the past president, immediate past president, Dr. Ingrid Daniels, who's based in South Africa. And the Secretary General could not be here with us, and neither send a message. So Dr. Daniels, thank you very much for stepping in to say a few words about the organizations and this webinar. Thank you. You can go ahead.
Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the participants today. Dr. Nasser Loza, the current World Federation for Mental Health President, Professor John Langbaugh, the current Regional Vice President for Africa, the WFMH Africa Advisory Committee, and all esteemed panelists. I'm so impressed by the various presenters that will be here today, and the focus specifically on decriminalization of suicide and suicide attempts in Africa. As an African, I am extremely concerned about the growing prevalence of mental health conditions, and specifically the criminalization of suicide and the lack of investment. As you know, the World Federation for Mental Health, in partnership with the World Health Organization and the United Nations, the theme this year for World Mental Health Day has been mental health is a universal human right. And ladies and gentlemen, we are not talking only about people with lived experience here. We're talking about everyone has a right to good mental health. And often everyone has a challenge at some time or the other with finding themselves in adverse situations which impact on our mental health. We've come through the COVID-19 pandemic, which was a great leveler, because during the pandemic, we all realized how vulnerable we are, how vulnerable our mental health is. So mental health is basically everyone's business. It's everyone's business. Suicide, as Professor John Langbaugh said, is the fourth lead cause of death amongst 15 to 29-year-olds. Ladies and gentlemen, here is a problem. Here is a huge concern. And it is estimated that 77% of global suicides occur in lower middle income countries. That's us here in Africa. Mental health conditions is on the rise globally, but specifically on the continent. So therefore, it has to be our business. We can't walk away. It is our business. This crisis has necessitated that mental health must be a priority on every government, every the 54 countries on this continent. It should be a priority, but sadly it is not. The World Health Organization way back in 2018 already stated that every 40 seconds, ladies and gentlemen, every 40 seconds someone dies by suicide, which is more than people dying by war and homicide put together. There's a problem. Every suicide, as we know, impacts on all of us. For every suicide, there are many more people who attempt suicide. This we know. So you have to agree with me that this has to be a priority. And so I'm very pleased that this is the focus of the webinar today. A prior suicide attempt is the single most important risk factor for suicide in the general population. And every suicide is a tragedy that affects families, communities, and entire countries. It has long-lasting and devastating implications and effects for those left behind. It is a concern, and therefore, it's everyone's business. It is our responsibility to make every effort to reverse the injustices and suffering and advance our strategies to ensure that we decriminalize suicide and we provide greater access and support and hope again for people so that we reverse this very sad prevalence rate, particularly amongst our youth and our young people. For every life saved, there's a return on investment. If you think of the many who have committed suicide, doctors, heart surgeons, musicians, actors, we are lesser as people for having lost wonderful, creative, talented souls. We have to invest in mental health. It has to be our priority. It's not up for any negotiation. Yet the shameful denial and failure to invest in mental health over the many years has resulted, in fact, in lost lives. And the lack of access to basic mental health as a human right contributes to this failure. Failure to invest and increase access has resulted in gross failure in our humanity. Mental health continues to be misunderstood. It continues to be ignored. It continues to be stigmatized. It continues to be underfunded. Most governments in low middle income countries spend less than 1% on mental health services. It continues to be overlooked. It was Martin King Jr. who said, "We are confronted with a fierce urgency of now, ladies and gentlemen. There is no such thing as ignoring. There is such a thing, though, as being too late, and I pray that we are not too late. There is no time for apathy or complacency. This is the time for vigorous and positive action. And I believe that the contributions today will take us closer to discussing the decriminalisation of suicide and suicide attempts on this continent, and that there will be prevention strategies put in place to restore human rights and the dignity of all. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Daniels. Well said. There is definitely a connection between universal human rights, mental health, and suicide. But I must reiterate, suicide is not a mental health condition. but people with mental health conditions are at greater risk of committing suicide. So that's what we are trying to advocate here. So I also want to just again remind our African governments about the SDG, that reducing the global suicide rate by 1/3 is a target of both the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the World WHO Comprehensive Mental Health Plan. So if you come back 2030 and you bragging about contributing or addressing the achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, and you cannot even reduce the prevalence of suicide and it's increasing, these are lives lost. This is not someone going to bed hungry. These are lives that have been lost. So you've not achieved anything. But thank you very much, Dr. Daniels, for that wonderful remarks. And I believe, those that are the policymakers out there are listening, especially in Africa, that we need to do something about the increase in prevalence of suicide, especially among young people, not just post-COVID, but even before COVID. Thank you very much again for the remark. I think we can now start our panel discussion. I know, Dr. Gamede, you will be catching a flight very soon. So I would like to start with you. So what are the challenges, barriers, and opportunities for suicide prevention and advocacy in an African country that does not criminalize suicide and suicide attempts? And that African country is South Africa, where you are based.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Prof. A good evening or good morning or good day, depending wherever you are. Thank you for having me today on this very important topic and on this very important occasion, I must say. It is quite a very important topic, especially for me, because for the past 5 years, I have been running an anti-suicide campaign, especially for high school learners, those that are exiting, because there has been an increase and reports haven't stopped. I was talking to the minister not long ago. She was saying these reports are coming back where young people in high schools are taking their lives, which is very, very, I would say, bad, because they are the future. So the challenges in an African country that have decriminalized, or that doesn't have that doesn't probably arrest someone who's taking his or her life, is that we can basically fight this scourge. We can work on this, have programs, and people can raise and say, this is what I'm going through. Those are some of the opportunities that we are having as a country. People can get the necessary help. People can actually seek help anyway. They can talk to anyone without fearing that they might be under, they might be criminalized for saying they are going through this, or they have suicidal thoughts. And with that being said, we still have challenges. You might think, if we are able to do it, why aren't we doing it? We still have challenges of young people who feel they are not safe, or they are not in a safe space to say they are going through thoughts or suicidal thoughts. They feel like they are not safe with us as a community to say that. Instead, they lock themselves in their rooms and decide whatever or however they will take their lives. So we have that biggest problem, and we also have a serious challenge of us as the community not sharing so much information about how they can receive help without judging them. It is still a stigma in this country. When you say you have suicidal thoughts, especially as a male, such as myself, educated as I am, it feels like you are weak, or they will pass remarks saying you are weak. And this is what we have found as Make a Mark Africa Youth Development, which is an organization that is running the hashtag Matric Bloody campaign. We have found that young people are stigmatized. Young people, they are put into so much pressure that they feel, there is no other option other than just maybe taking their own lives. So I think the call out there to everyone is to make the resources to help young people who are going through whatever that they might be going through, which could lead them into suicidal thoughts, to avail those resources, to avail themselves as individuals, to say, you know what, I am available to talk. Sometimes young people, all they need is just to talk. And the center of the campaign, when we started 5 years ago, was just to avail ourselves. I remember that when I started, it was just sharing my journey of doing grade 10 twice, grade 11 twice, and grade 12 twice as a motivational message to a young person who is finding it difficult to accept failing grade 12 in South Africa. So I think if we can have a lot of people who will avail themselves, we are going to be able to fight. And of course, the budget for rolling out campaigns, rolling out initiatives, and also I'm not going to leave out, as I end, I'm not going to leave out the issue of fixing the socio-economic status of each and every country, especially African countries, because some people are under pressure because economically they are not in a good standing. And the last thing is fixing the family structure. I think that's the most important thing. In Africa, a child was, and I hope is still raised by a village, which means if we can go back to that family-orientated community, we will be able to fight this scourge, which is destroying our young people who are the future of this country or future of the world. Not that an old person should take their own lives, but I mean, it's very, very painful to see young people taking their lives. I think that's all from my side, and I really appreciate what this amazing organization is doing to combat this scourge. And I will definitely apologize that I'm going to sneak out and run to the airport. I'm on my way to speak to young people in Zimbabwe.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gabeni. But before you go, can you probably spend 1 minute to talk about this organization and what you do specifically in Johannesburg?
Thank you so much, Prof, for awarding me this opportunity. So Make a Mark Africa Youth Development, it is a South African-based organization. Head office is in Durban, but it is an African organization that run life skills and mentorship programs. We do do awarenesses on issues such as mental health and issues such as suicide as one of the issues. So we are not only based in Johannesburg, where I am, but we are all over, and we are running this campaign again next year. And it is at a time now that we are recruiting ambassadors across the country who want to join the hashtag Matric Bloody campaign, which seeks to stop the issue of suicide, or which seeks to raise awareness, especially to young people who might not receive good marks and who might think it's the end of the road. So we are available on social media, and our website is makemarkafrica.com. So everyone can connect with me on social media. It's Gamede Sanele in all social media platforms, and that's where we can work together.
Thank you very much. For those of us that are in other parts of Africa, hashtag matric. Matric is like the O-level in West Africa. So what he's saying is, high school students who don't do well in the exams, tend to be suicidal, and that's what they are addressing, to say there is hope and there is the future. You don't need to take your life because you did not do very well in the matric. We've decided to take one or two questions after the presenters present, because we want to reserve all the interaction and the question and answer at the end of all the presentations. So, but if there's any critical question that someone wants to ask, you can put it on the chat and we can ask that, or you can just unmute yourself for Dr. Gamede based on what he has said.
So, sorry, Prof.
Go ahead.
Yes, I just want Dr. Gamede to, and for those who are on the call, if they could also provide their emails for collaboration purposes. Just a comment. So maybe if they put it in the chat room, we can pick it up and then relate, because I'm leading this initiative for the IASC effort on decriminalizing attempted suicide in Africa. And I think that this is a very good program. I find persons who are engaged in very fantastic work like Dr. Gamede online, and it'll be good to begin to share their numbers, their emails and contacts so we could relate. Just a small comment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, I was going to say that to ask the panelists, so if they don't mind, I mean, it's not mandatory to share your contact details if you want the audience to follow up with you, and even the fellow panelists as well, and just put it on the chat. But I know Dr. Gamede had a PowerPoint presentation, but because he's, in the interest of time, he's rushing to the airport. But he has shared it with us, and would share that with everyone that's registered for this webinar through their emails, which we do have. But thank you very much, Dr. Gamede. If there are no questions, is there a question?
There is, Prof. Is there any there's one who's saying, is there any program set out for university students dealing with suicidal attacks, to one like that of for matriculants? It's a very good question. Thank you so much. I think from our side as Make a Mark Africa Youth Development, we haven't started anything for particularly on suicide as a program for students, but we do have a mentorship program that previously we were running, what we call free mentorship at the park program, where we mentored young people at the park on a monthly basis in 6 African countries, including South Africa. But we are rolling it out online so that we expand our reach. So you can keep checking on our platforms.
Thank you very much. I know you are on your way to the airport, but thank you for making time to be with us this evening. We wish you safe travels. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Prof.
Thank you. Next, I would like to ask Dr. Carol Labor the question. What are some of the challenges, barriers, and opportunities for suicide prevention and advocacy in an African country that still criminalizes suicide and suicide attempts? And that country is Sierra Leone, where you are based.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you for having me on the webinar today. So suicide is a global issue. It's a global concern, and it's definitely a concern for us here in Sierra Leone. It can be characterized here as a shadow epidemic. We know it's happening, but yet we have to strengthen our data collection so that we can increase reporting. There are stories of individuals here committing suicide, children that have low grades, women that have mental health challenges such as depression. And then most recently, we had what we can characterize as a soldier-assisted suicide, where an individual actually confiscated a gun from OSD officer and turned the gun in the streets and confronted a soldier, and he was shot by the soldier. So decriminalizing suicide and implementing effective prevention measures is essential for us here in Sierra Leone in addressing suicide and suicidal ideation. The challenge is Sierra Leone, like many other countries, has historically criminalized suicide in Africa. There's existing provision within our common law that references suicide. It's actually called offense against a person, and it's an indictable offense, a felony to be exact. This punitive approach further stigmatizes individuals in crisis and can discourage them from seeking help. It's crucial that we decriminalize suicide and shift towards a compassionate, preventive approach. Criminalization of suicide violates an individual's fundamental rights. Decriminalization can help to reduce the social stigma associated with suicide and mental health issues, and potentially encourage help-seeking behaviors. Decriminalization paves the way for more robust mental health support systems and the establishment of suicide prevention strategies, awareness, education, through the implementation of a national awareness campaign to reduce stigma and promote understanding. I won't say there's any barriers in Sierra Leone to decriminalization because the political will is there. His Excellency, the President, retired Brigadier Julius Matta Bio, and our Honorable Minister of Health, Dr. Austin Demby, are both keen on transforming how we look at mental health in Sierra Leone, and that's inclusive of suicide. The first step in decriminalizing suicide is, of course, legal reform, where we'll work with legal experts and policymakers to draft amendments to decriminalization and advocate for the enactment or revision of laws that protect the rights of individuals in crisis and assure access to mental health support. We're also embarking on training individuals, 5,000 individuals within the next 5 years, to provide evidence-based mental health and psychosocial support services. We're also expanding our 117 response line to include mental health responses so that we increase referrals and in due time increase accessibility and availability of mental health and psychosocial support care across the country. Our approach is very robust. We're aiming high. As I stated, we have the political will. We have the expertise of the Ministry of Health. And we're also going beyond just the Ministry of Health, as we recently established the Presidential Task Force on Mental Health. It's multi-sectoral, so we're looking at mental health across all life stages. In conclusion, decriminalizing suicide and implementing effective prevention measures is essential for protecting human rights and addressing mental health conditions here in Sierra Leone. As a Sierra Leonean, I am committed, along with my colleagues, to focus on awareness, support, legal reform, evidence-based intervention, and really examining suicide and suicide ideation across all life stages. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Labor, for that overview on suicide and suicide attempts and prevention efforts in Sierra Leone. We can take one question from the audience, 1 or 2 questions. If you have any questions for Dr. Labor, you can put in the chat. You can raise your hand and we will take you in turn. Any burning question, one or two that we can take?
Yes, I wanted to
Sure.
from Dr. Leber. So, Doc, is there any direct link with what you're doing and any center in the university in Sierra Leone? Is there any collaboration in terms of research, in terms of gatekeeper programs, and anything like that?
Thank you for your question. Yes, thank you for your question. So what's happening currently through the Presidential Task Force on Mental Health? We have all the stakeholders, including our newly appointed Minister of Higher Education. And so within the space of the task force is where conversations are being held on how we can collaborate. And of course, with the university here, Comas University of College of Medical and Health Allied Sciences, to provide support to students and also collaborate on research. We're embarking on a very long journey here in Sierra Leone. We're working on the repeal and replacement of our 1902, yes, 1902, 200 plus years old legislation, which is actually called the 1902 Lunacy Act. So currently that's being redrafted and it'll go through Parliament with the hopes of passing.
Thank you very much. And I rest my case that we inherited some of this legislation from the colonial folks. I don't like to call them, as some Africans say, colonial masters, because they are not. But thank you very much. I think it's important that's a very good question that Dr. Osafo asked, that, whatever you're doing, it's important that we collaborate with universities and academics who are who can generate the evidence, empirical evidence for whatever interventions you might be embarking on. And I mean here, context specific. I mean, the evidence is there, what is happening in Ghana, but we need context specific evidence in Sierra Leone as well. I see someone in the chat. I'm not sure if Dr. Leber, you can see there, or it's just a comment. It's a comment. Thank you very much. Again, with the audience, you have an opportunity at the end of all the presentations to engage with the panelists as well. So we would like to move on now to the next panelist. That's, or do you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I'm traveling as well, so I'm going to log off and then switch to another device, but I'll be on the call. Thank you so much, everyone.
Well, thank you for accommodating us. Thank you. I would like to ask, go to the next panelist, that's the Ms. Murafat Alabi, about the decriminalization of suicide and suicide attempts in Africa and the implications for prevention and human rights. Ms. Alabi, what are your thoughts around that generally? I mean, I know you are based in Nigeria and you are the Deputy Regional Coordinator for a non-profit, mental health non-profit organization. So if you can, what are your thoughts around the whole issue of decriminalization of suicide and suicide attempts in Africa, implications for prevention and human rights, particularly in Nigeria? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening. I'm so glad to be here this evening. I want to appreciate the organizer of this program, because this topic is coming at a very important point in time for Africans. The question is, what is my thought about the decriminalization of suicide and suicidal attempts in Africa? From what we have, we know that suicide itself is a global concern generally. It's a public health issue. And from statistics, we already know that we have almost 700,000 deaths occurring from suicide yearly. And before we can have one suicidal attempt, there must be one suicide, before we can have a complete suicide, there must be at least 20 suicidal attempts. That is to tell us how important this is to African community. And for most individuals that commit suicide, some of them have a lot of issues, especially psychosocial issues that they deal with. And for most of them, some of them may also have mental health issues. And if an individual is having a mental health issue and the person is committing an act under under this illness, then I would say that it's the illness, not it's not a crime to say. When you look at Nigeria specifically, we have
Ms. Alabi,
yes,
I know you have a presentation. Do you want us to share that?
Yes.
Well, yeah, because we have a presentation that you sent. Yes. Let's share that. I have the colleagues there. Can you, Slee, can you share Ms. Alabi's presentation?
Thank you so much.
You want? Okay, yeah, good. You can go ahead, Ms. Alabi. Can you see the screen?
Okay.
They've shared your presentation.
Okay.
Can you see
this are the outline of the.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Yes, I can. This is the outline of my presentation. Next slide, please.
I think you are muted.
Yes, I can. Next slide. I was explaining earlier that, oh no, I'm on. I don't know if anyone can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm connecting with two devices. Sorry. Okay. Like I said, suicide is a global public health concern.
And the death rate from suicide, we have almost 700,000 deaths from suicide. And before you can have a complete suicide attempt, an individual must have before you can have one complete suicide, an individual must have had almost 20 suicidal attempts in their lifetime before they can have a complete suicide. And studies have also shown that suicide is more prevalent in low and middle income countries, and that's where we have 79% of suicide occurring in low and middle income countries. Next slide, please. And from statistics also, we know that when people are having suicidal thoughts, we have a lot of psychosocial stressors. People that have major or minor mental health disorder account for majority of suicidal attempts that we have. And when you look at Nigeria generally, the attempted suicide, we have a criminal code act, and in that act, it's stated in section 327, and the act to say that if an individual actually does not try to commit suicide, such an individual is liable to 1 year imprisonment. But if the person actually completed the suicide, then nothing can, there's no law abiding for such an individual. But if the suicide is not complete, then such an individual must be in prison for 1 year. And there's this question I do ask myself. If I'm having low mood, loss of interest in previously enjoyable activities, and I think things are not really working out, and I try nobody to actually come to my head, then what? And it all might be better. I keep asking myself, if there is no support, anyone around me to actually support me, how to suicide, then am I really criminal code is saying yes, such an individual is guilty of an offense? And when you look at the statistics of Nigerian population in 2019, we have 6.9%, 6.9 per 1,000 population of Nigerian population actually have suicidal thoughts at one point or the other in their lives. Next slide. And I have here the risk factors. This has been expatiated a lot by the individual will only have a completed suicidal attempt if there is a previous risk. Said that for one completed suicide, the person must have like almost like 20 attempts. Then there might be issue of suicidal behavior in the family. Then we have childhood experiences. For some individuals who go through their childhood not being happy, being subjected to major life stressors or a form of abuse, so such an individual might grow up to have a form of suicidal tendency. Then we have chronic physical diagnosis of terminal illnesses. The president have discussed about this. Then chronic medical conditions, substance use. Also, people that have financial issues too can also have the thought of committing suicide. Even if individuals have suicidal ideation or thoughts, what are the legal implications of this? Like I would like to use Nigeria as a case study, like I said earlier, and here imprisonment, that means criminalization. And I keep asking people, why do I have to criminalize someone because the person is actually sick? Instead of looking at what can be done for this individual, instead of shifting my from criminalizing people to actually doing something that is worthwhile for them, something that can actually making them to go back to their unit in the stage. So instead of criminalizing, why not support individuals that are having suicidal ideation or attempt? The other implication, who don't want to talk about it because they know that when they say, oh, they say, oh, I'm having suicidal ideation or suicidal attempt, then the next thing is, oh, that means, oh, yeah.
I think we are losing you.
You have to be subjected to a criminal one. Such an individual wants to keep it. When individuals do this, when they hide what they are. So, hello? I don't know if you can still hear me.
We can hear you now. We lost you.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so one of the implication I have here is that criminalizing suicidal attempts or suicidal ideation distract the society on focusing on the treatment. The focus should be on the treatment, not on actually putting this set of individuals in prison. So it distracts the society from what they're supposed to focus their attention on. And the focus of attention should be on either primary, secondary, or tertiary prevention, like I have in the slide. I say here that if an individual is having suicidal ideation or thoughts, most of the time this might have started going on right from the early childhood years, when the child is still learning about his or an environment, especially a child that grows up in an environment that is very, let's say, the place is not really conducive. The person is exposed to abuse, one form of abuse or the other. So when we are talking about primary prevention, we want to actually identify those people who are at risk of actually committing suicide at the long run. Who are this vulnerable population? We want to know who they are. We want to identify them. If you're able to identify them, what can we do? I do tell people, individuals are going through major stressors in their life. We can actually support them. Being supportive goes a long way. We can be kind. These are the time we need to identify this set of individuals. And early identification goes a long way. If we're able to identify this vulnerable group, then we can actually tailor the environment to actually meet their needs. And what do we do at this point in time? An individual is down psychologically. You want to ask this person, what do you think is making you to be down psychologically? What exactly is the problem?
You have 2 minutes.
We have been able to identify the problem. Okay, thank you. So if we have been able to identify the problem, we want to assist the person to come up with ideas or how to actually solve this problem that they are going through. Then the second level is the secondary prevention. Oh, this person is already having something that he or she is battling with that we know. Maybe let's give an example, maybe a physical health condition. If an individual is having a physical health condition that is depressing them, that is making them to have suicidal ideation, we want to sit down with the person. This physical condition, do you have control over it? No, I don't have control over it. What exactly do you have control over? Then we focus on what that individual have control over. We assist that person to develop skills so that at least they can be there for themselves. And in the tertiary prevention, this thing is there. They don't have control over it. But what can they do to actually minimize problem? We have to look at things within the community or within the society that can actually assist them. Suicidal attempts in Africa, it's because we still do that, each and every one of us. If we as an individual can actually be supportive of people within our environment, within our social network, if we are able to support them when they're in one form of distress or the other, if we are able for this set of individuals, then I think Africa will be a great nation.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I like the way you categorize the prevention efforts at different levels, primary, secondary, and tertiary. I'm not sure if there's a question on the chat for you. We'll take one burning question. Otherwise, we'll move on. You'll have an opportunity to answer at the end. I don't see any except the colleagues there. Is there any question on the chat? No. I would like to move on to the next panelist, Professor Joseph Asafo. Prof, I know you've done a lot of work around particularly the decriminalization of suicide in Ghana. That was, I think, 2021, if I'm correct. And you know, what are some of the challenges, innovation, and the lessons learned from the decriminalization efforts?
Thank you, Prof.
Country that's recently decriminalized, that's Ghana. Are there any implications for mental health policy and suicide prevention in Africa?
Thank you, Prof. Will I be allowed to share some short slides? Okay, then the person managing should give me the access to. Okay.
Yeah, we can make you host. I think they tried, or just that you joined late. So, yeah. But the colleagues can, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'm on now.
Yeah.
So let me use a few minutes to address this issue, the question you raised quickly. So first and foremost, as we know, suicide was decriminalized in Ghana 28th of March this year. It's been a colonial legacy for years, since 1960. And anybody who attempted and you were arrested, you were jailed or fined. And we had evidence of hefty fines and people being jailed in Ghana for this particular criminal code. And so what we did was quickly begin to gather data that will drive our advocacy. So we did a data-driven advocacy program. And I would like to walk us through just a few of those. This is a Ghana Association for Suicide Prevention and then Center for Suicide and Violence Research, a group of psychologists and mental health workers who decided to do this in Ghana. So the first thing we did, after we had put together one or two papers, we did a first petition on the 10th of September 2012 to the Parliament of Ghana. So you can see myself and some colleagues, and presented a petition indicating why we think that suicide should be, attempted suicide should be decriminalized. Two lessons and two challenges we saw in that approach. One was that we needed to expand context, the understanding of suicidal behavior within a Ghanaian context. And we also need to engage key political and critical stakeholders, which we did not. Sometimes in the heat of advocacy, one can think that all I need is to get to the right persons or some group of persons and then make my case. Now, it doesn't work like that in at least my part of the world. There should be a way of engaging them, and I will show you how we did engage them. So this was the first petition, 2012, that didn't make any impact. And then we did a second petition in 2017. By this time around, we had learned our lessons, and on the 30th of March, 2017, we brought together key stakeholders. This included police officers, military, judges, lawyers, mental health advocates, religious leaders. And this was a real groundbreaking meeting, after which we began seeing the way forward because we had engaged their views and they wanted to be part of what we're doing. The lessons we learned after this was that when somebody raised the issue in Parliament that suicide should be decriminalized, two key parliamentarians, minority leader and then the majority leader, deputy speaker, were opposed to any attempt by our group to decriminalize suicide. So we saw that, again, one lesson is engaging further engaging key stakeholders is very important. So we roped in the parliamentarians and we went to them one-on-one. We picked them on one-on-one. The minority leader was engaged one-on-one. The deputy speaker was engaged one-on-one to let them appreciate the context and the background from where we are coming from. Following from there, as you may be aware, a lot of papers and studies began to burgeon, and they began to talk about the need to decriminalize in low and middle income countries to make way for prevention. So what we added after the second petition was to expand our studies at 3 key levels. One is to expand the attitude towards suicide so we can understand the cultural meanings of suicide and how that is influencing the stigma against the act. And 2, to embark on some epidemiological study so that we can show these key stakeholders the extent of the problem among at-risk groups like adolescents, like the elderly and others. And then also to bring on board lived experiences, people who had actually attempted and fortuitously survived. What were their views? So we began using the data to drive the following advocacy that you're going to be seeing. So right from there, the data from students, we began roping this data to train students to change their attitude towards suicide. We collected data, also extended the study to teachers. And that also was very interesting. So teachers came on board. Not only that, we engaged the police. We brought the police on board, and these police officers who are addressed together, my colleagues seated here, are the top-notch members of the what we call the homicide unit of the police service in the capital. They were engaged in a 3-day training, explaining to them why we need their support and they need to understand why we have to decriminalize attempted suicide. Not only that, we engaged media. The media was actively engaged, and for every engagement, we were actually using the data we collected from them to train them. So it was an advocacy that was driven by data, and that was a great magic for us. Religious, these are community leaders, traditional community and traditional leaders were also engaged in our communities, and we brought them 3-day training to let them understand, because, for example, if a girl child gets sexually molested and then she becomes suicidal, these are the traditional leaders who say, well, we don't need to take this to the law court or to the police. Let's settle this traditionally. And so a number of cases were recorded among young people who were suicidal, were as a result of cases of sexual abuse and molestation, which this group of persons were not allowed to go to the law court because of the fear that there will be a dent on the family's image. So we did training for them as well. Not only that, we got health professionals equally engaged, did a training for them. And then religious leaders. In Ghana, there are 3 key institutions that deepen stigma towards suicide. The first is religious leaders. The second, they see you as religious, they see you as a sinner and somebody who has violated divine morality. Second is the community. They see you as antisocial and a criminal. And the third is the state. The state sees you as a criminal who have been arrested. So we identify all these 3 key actors and then engage them. Then the community members and their chiefs. This is an example of a program we did in one community where the linguist and a chief were both, a linguist was suicidal, and the chief invited us to do a program for them. And then we went to persons who had lived experiences and also had gatekeeper training with them. I think the biggest opportunity we had was judges, magistrates, and lawyers, when we got opportunity to train 247 judges across the country to let them appreciate what this is all about. And after that, we also had a chance to engage parliamentarians, their views. Following from this engagement, some parliamentarians sponsored a private members' bill. These 3 parliamentarians were the key persons in this regard. They sponsored this to make sure suicidal behavior or attempted suicide is removed from our law books. Let me just skip this one. These are just the processes of. So on the 28th of March, Ghana's parliament decriminalized, and we are waiting for presidential assent, which we are sure to come through before the end of this year. Now, so what next? Quickly. So as soon as this happened, IASP, that is the International Association for Suicide Prevention, has already initiated a program called Partnerships for Life, Global Initiative to Prevent Suicide, and has established 6 regional networks. Africa is one of such regional networks. And the idea is to support evidence-informed national approaches to prevent suicide. So they mandated Ghana to lead the regional effort. And the aim is to establish a cross-regional collaboration of experts, supporting a comprehensive strategic approach to suicide prevention in the Africa region. So our role in the sub-region is that we want to be helping to increase the number of nations in Africa who are committed to planning, implementation, and evaluation of comprehensive suicide prevention programs. And we are hoping to achieve this by 4 key objectives, or 5. We want to identify and bring together key experts and stakeholders, some of which I see on this call, and then raise awareness about suicidal behavior and prevention, which your university is doing in this important webinar. Thanks so much for this. And then to develop an understanding of the specific needs and culturally relevant issues that are related to suicide prevention, particularly in the Africa region, and develop a collaboration. So we need this collaboration, and I think that what we are doing is extremely important to forge a certain phase. Africa needs to tell her own story from her own data and by her own people. That's my point. So where are we now? Currently, we have had 6 meetings since March. The next meeting is coming up. I'm talking about the Partnership for Africa, for Partnership for Life, which Ghana is leading, of which we are bringing all other countries in Africa together so we can tell our story, deal with our own issues, and then learn, co-share ideas on how to pick up suicide prevention in the Africa region. We have Nigeria, Cameroon, DR Congo has joined, Uganda has joined, Kenya, Togo, Burundi, Madagascar, Central Africa Republic, Ethiopia, Gambia, of course, Ghana and others keep joining. So when you look at these countries and the report they are provided, you can deduce 6 key things. One, that most of the countries have no clear plans on suicide prevention. And this is clear because all these countries, except Ghana, still has laws that criminalize this behavior. So that will never encourage any national program on suicide prevention. Suicide is criminalized in this country, and deep cultural issues are involved in the risk leading to suicide in these areas. Tabooing and stigma is widespread, and there is no systematic data collection on this behavior in these countries. And there are several associations and organizations that are attempting to come up in these countries to address the issue. And so this webinar is extremely important to still increase the enthusiasm and the fervor in bringing together Africa's innovation and creativity in dealing with our programs. Finally, let's look at implication for mental health policy and suicide prevention in the region. If we manage to push these changes, it's going to facilitate the development of national suicide prevention strategies. In fact, currently in Ghana, active discussions have begun. This couldn't have been possible when it was still criminalized. So when we decriminalize, it allows discussions in very key spaces for onward actions and implementation. 2 is to facilitate the introduction of suicide prevention services. Currently, our association, which is the Ghana Association for Suicide Prevention, is almost ready to set up crisis lines from support we get them from elsewhere. Then facilitate the breaking down of social stigma and self-stigma surrounding disclosures. I remember from 28 March, we have received several calls of people now emboldened to open up and share. So indeed, when suicide is decriminalized, people have the courage to seek help and then facilitate ramping up of activities by professional groups into the mental health space. So decriminalizing suicide from a context where attempted suicide or contexts that are very prescriptive and prohibitive, like most African countries, is a key action that must be taken. I'd like to end on these key lessons in decriminalizing in Africa. One is that you have to let your advocacy be evidence-driven. Evidence-driven. In fact, from at-risk groups, you have to get evidence. It must not just be talks. Politicians are very okay in Africa, are very okay with talks. They have learned that from various historical upheavals. So they know and understand talks. If you are just going to talk, the talk will not work. You need data from at-risk group, and we need it. And that's why rolling out prevention schemes on the basis of evidence-based study will be very important. Number 2 is to engage key stakeholders. And here, I've just listed some of those we have engaged and how it's been very, very fruitful. Judges, lawyers, parliamentarians, school teachers and headmasters, police and police officers, so all the security apparatuses, religious groups or leaders, because in Africa, as you know, it is currently noted as the center of Christianity in Africa. And so a lot of religious leaders are very much condemnatory of this. And if you engage them, it's very helpful. Media houses, community leaders, and then attempt survivors and their families. The third lesson is that we have to build collaborations with these stakeholders through gatekeeper trainings. So it's not enough to just discuss with them, but provide evidence to train them, get the data from them, and use the same data in training them. It shapes attitude. It really destroys very strongly held negative attitudes towards suicide and suicidal persons. And finally, be resilient and patient in the fight. Be patient with them. It's a very long uphill fight. And you need to be patient. It's not a one-day thing at all. It takes time. It's taking us active engagements actually from 2020 to 2008 to 2023. So it takes a lot of effort, a lot of energy, but commitment is very important. I like to say there cannot be no health without mental health, as we know. And that suicide prevention is everyone's business. Thank you, sir, and God bless all of you.
Thank you very much, Prof. I know you are going out, over time, but I was riveted to your presentation in such a way that I could not stop.
I'm sorry.
No. I mean, this is why we tracked you down, and I read your papers, and I knew there's a lot that could be learned from you and what you guys have done in Ghana. Other African countries take note. I mean, and I like, I mean, as an academic myself, and we had that conversation just now with the colleague who presented from Sierra Leone. It has to be evidence-based. Whatever intervention has to be evidence-based. There's a lot that we can learn from it. And I like when you said, there's an outcome, well, not an impact as such, where people are opening up since March and bolding to open up. And that is encouraging. And again, our next presenter is going to talk about that. He's going to open up, to the rest of the world and Africa about what he went through. Mr. Jude Poku, who I believe is Ghanaian, on the name, I may be wrong, who I met a couple of weeks ago at an event in New York, in New York City. And came up to me as someone, he saw that I'm, receiving an award for mental health. And he said, I see you're receiving an award for mental health, what you are doing on the continent, and we started talking, and he started talking about, his experience. And then I said, oh, wow, this is coincidental. Guess what? I'm planning to have a webinar on suicide. Would you be willing to share your story? And he said, absolutely. And he's here today to share his story. So I will call on Mr. Jude Poku to share his story. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, everybody. It's Jude here. It's a great introduction. Thank you, Professor Johannes. It was really an opportunity, and I'm grateful to have met you and have this opportunity here today to speak on the experience that I've gone through and what I learned from it and what I can see others can benefit from that as well. I want to also thank everybody that's gone before me and who will go after me for sharing their evidence and what they've seen based on the risk factors and the potential preventions and solutions. Because just listening to everybody that's gone before me, I can see all the stuff that I had gone through and how real it is, right? And how better I may have been off, or how faster my learning curve would have been if I had access to this type of information or this level of education before I had gone through what I had gone through. But to just share more about myself, my story starts about 3, maybe 4 years ago now. I was just coming back to New York from living in Beijing right before the pandemic had started. When I got back to New York, I actually fell into a downward spiral of emotions, fell into things like depression and anxiety, nihilism, existentialism, all those sorts of isms, for lack of a better term. But what I was able to start using to support myself during that period was books. I got really into reading things on spirituality, self-help, self-development, personal development, and professional development, and a little bit of entrepreneurship as well. And so I had used those points as a basis, as a foundation to try to work through some of the issues I was having with regards to my mental health. So the business I had built at the time was a music production business. So I was using music as a platform to share everything that I was learning about myself and I was going through as a means to get my emotions out and separate myself from them, but also as a means of being able to, again, start to share and support and educate other people who I feel might be going through similar things as me. So the first year of going through that experience, building that business, doing music, it was rocky. It was okay, but it was rocky. At the end of that first year, I had the privilege of coming back from a project in London. But as I came back from London, around the same time as literally about a year after I had first started to fall into that cycle, I crashed and fell back into those emotions, that depression, anxiety, nihilism, existentialism, all that stuff, right? And so being where I'm from in the world, in the US, the New York area, there's a big emphasis on hustle culture, which is having strong ambition, having strong desire, work ethic, and just really grinding very hard. So I was leveraging those behavioral attributes to try and suppress the emotions that I was feeling, which obviously looking back at it wasn't the best idea, right? But I had used those emotions to try and go farther and work harder within my life and my business and look for a way to just share and get my message out there and all the stuff I was learning. So the second year was, in my eyes and my feeling during that time in that moment, it felt like I was doing better. It felt like things were changing. But when I took a hard look at myself, everything on my outside was changing. My, people I was meeting, places I was traveling to, but in reality, the inside and the feelings that I was holding internally were not shifting. And I could see that because of my situation, my emotional stability, and even my financial stability, there was no change there. So at the end of the second year, I had come back from a trip from Los Angeles, and again, around that same time, like clockwork, I fell back into that downward spiral, that crashing of emotions. So at this point, I really just started to feel sick and tired of being sick and tired. And that's when these suicidal ideations really started to compound and expand. It was hard for me to log online, to talk to friends, to go to the gym, really just to get out of bed. I felt a weight, a physical weight was upon me. But what the turning point for me was I had been a part of many different groups during that time, again, during my period of self-development, really looking for answers of ways to where I could really support myself to become a better person, become the best version of myself. So I probably spent over $30,000 on different programs, on different seminars to go to, courses, coaches, books, and all this type of stuff to really find what was happening within my mind. So I had joined one group in particular with a friend of mine, and within that group, they started to share with us about being able to write in a specific way. And that specific way of writing, they called self-forgiveness. This was interesting to me because, and the difference between that and everything else I was doing was that in everything else I was doing before to try to support myself, to change and increase my mentality, all the other methodologies and modalities we're talking a lot about being able to think big and focus on the future and move closer towards your goals, but not a lot of them were discussing on the fact of being able to look back and look at who you were and where you came from and the decisions that you made in life that have brought you up to this current point, or brought me up to this current point. And so through the writing process of self-forgiveness, I was actually able to have a systematic and formulaic way to release these emotions and to again separate them from myself and make them objective, versus what I was doing with my music and my business that was still coming from a point of business and entertainment value. So the self-forgiveness process was really what had spurred that like a physical visceral release of some of these emotions in my body, and I began to feel like a weight was left off my shoulders, and I began to feel like a stable functioning member of society again. And so seeing what that process had done for me to be able to transform me in such a short period of time, after about 2 weeks to a month, I saw the potential and the power of being able to be educated in such a proper way to be able to learn how to manage my emotions, learn how to forgive myself, learn how to look back at my past and release past traumas and past memories, so that I would be able to essentially free up, and for lack of a better term, memory and hard drive space within my body, so that I could take on new challenges and go on and take on the world. So now I see my purpose, or that supported me to find my purpose of being able to support as many people as possible through helping them understand how to use these tools, helping them understand how to write, how to manage themselves, and how to find that emotional stability and how to transform their thinking. And so really through finding purpose within that, that is the underlying point, which was able to support me to bring myself out of that season.
Thank you very much, Jude, and thank you for the courage to share your lived experience with us. I really appreciate it, and I know a lot of the audience would have questions for you, which we'll pack for now. If you have questions for and clarity and points of clarification for Jude, please put it on the chat. We're going to take questions at the end of the presentations. But thank you again, and I'm listening to you. There's one thing I heard, which is, you know, the first step is to accept that you had a problem and you tackled it, you know, and for, I believe, you know, a lot of young people, not just here in Africa, but all over the world, will be listening to you and learning from how you bounce back. And that's what we call resilience. And you are a resilient young man. But thank you for sharing your lived experience with us. Please stay. I believe there are questions for you at the end of the webinar. Thank you very much. I will go to the next presenter, and that's Mr. Gabriel Lungu. Gabriel, I know you work in the Ministry of Health in Zambia, and you're a mental health officer. How do we overcome the legal and cultural barriers towards the decriminalization of suicide in Africa? And you can use Zambia as an example. 10 minutes, please.
Thank you so much. I would like to, do you have my presentation on the other end?
Yes, I think they will share it now.
Okay. Yeah, as we are waiting for the IT team to share, yeah, so Zambia shares the common background in terms of mental health in Africa or in the world at large. So taking examples of Zambia, well, mental health has been one of the most neglected field, and of course, suicide has been one of the major issues also. Just taking the lessons from the past 2 years, I think we have recorded quite a number of suicidal cases happening in the country that have really attracted a lot of stakeholders to what we are doing as a country. So my presentation is bordering on what the legal and cultural impressions towards decriminalization, because apparently for now it's looked as not really a health concern, but more leaning on the legal aspect of it. Next slide. So Zambia has some legal frameworks that exist as dated as 1967, that is 3 years after independence. And this one is the Suicidal Act. And I'm happy that this legal framework was developed just a few years. I don't know what really, really inspired it to be enacted, but it's according to the chapter 89 of the laws of Zambia, and plays a crucial role in shaping the legal landscape surrounding suicide in the country. And it was enacted to address various aspects of suicide and its related issues. And I'm sure there might have been issues arising during that time. So this legal framework addresses quite a number of issues, and particularly this time around, it has become one of the reference because of the escalating numbers of suicidal cases that have happened in the country, particularly among the young people. And one, of course, the prominent judge in the country who attempted to take his own life recently. And that also sparked a lot of discussions between among the legal fraternity. So in terms of shaping mental health, 2 major legal frameworks exist. That is the Mental Health Act number 6 of 2019, recently enacted, as well as the Suicidal Act. However, we have very critical interplays that stands to be barriers in addressing suicide issues in the country. That is bordering on legal, religious, culture, and professional healthcare itself. Next slide. So when we a little bit look at the interpretation of the Suicidal Act itself, we have very interesting provisions according to sections. So section 3 to section 6 of the Suicidal Act really speak positively towards the decriminalization of suicide. Particularly section 3, it considers suicide not to be an offense at all. So this is one of the positivity from that Suicide Act. So it recognizes that individuals who attempt or die by suicide should not be considered as criminals. Instead, the act reflects on more compassionate understanding of mental health, emphasizing the need for support and of course, rather than punishment itself, which is a very progressive section. But again, in the same act, when we look at some of the terminologies that come out there, committing becomes one of the hampering, because the general public, once they hear the word commit, they really take it not really as a friendly term that should stimulate them to seek health care services. And then section 4 looks at a warrant to be issued for person attempting suicide. So this section addresses situations where a person attempts suicide and is apparently mentally disordered or defective. And it aligns with the intention of safeguarding individuals who may be expressing severe emotional distress and require mental health assistance. So here again, the warrant part becomes a legal terminology that makes this act ineffective. Next slide. Another section, which is section 5, looks at the apprehension without warrant. So this section also empowers officers. The key word here is officers, to apprehend. Again, apprehension, another terminology, and convey a person who has attempted suicide to a suitable facility for detention, another terminology. So if they believe the individual is mentally disordered or defective. So yes, it empowers officers to get hold of this person and place this person in a suitable place. But the terms again, or maybe the people who are responding to that suicidal act are more inclined, or maybe those coming from the legal fraternity, not really from the health aspect of it. So this provision emphasizes the need for immediate intervention when a person's mental health is at risk. And then section 6, which is one of the progressive provision as well, it also ensures that individuals apprehended under section 4 are subject to an inquiry into their mindset of so they need to undergo the mental status examination. So this again, what is coming out there is the terminologies, meaning that this act purely is applied by the people in the legal fraternity, not really incorporating the people from the healthy segment. Next slide. Two critical provisions again of the Suicide Act are the suicidal pacts. This I would simply say is these are more leaning towards maybe people who may assist someone to take his own life, or they become accomplices in that. So this one I will, for now, maybe preserve it for legal interpretation, because it looks not really on an individual, but those who may be in the accomplice in that state. Next slide. Now, with the current interplay, also we have seen that social media and the reporting has become a key issue. So marrying the Suicidal Act with a social media is like the Suicide Act becomes passive, and the social media usually and reporting becomes more influenced at that. Why? Because suicide is publicly considered as either a criminal act or a sin or anything that does not really get linked to health services. So the emergence of social media has brought forth concerns about the impact of online behavior on individuals with mental health. So comments made on platforms on cases of suicide or suicidal attempts reveals the divergence of mixed beliefs of people from different cultures and religious affiliation, and that itself can be hateful and potentially harmful. So though not directly fulfilling under the purview of the Suicide Act, they highlight the importance of responsible online behavior and the need to foster a culture of empathy, support, and responsible media reporting. Next slide. So what are the interventions that ministry has considered, or with other line ministers, which we are fostering to implement. So we are supporting collaborative engagement with legal-minded personnel to interpret the Act into understandable language. For now, as I said, the Act is very much passive. And what we see how it is being interpreted, it towards leaning or empowering the people from the legal fraternity. It's not inclusive to include stakeholders such as the religious people, people in the health fraternity, the community, or even traditional leaders. And then also, we are advocating through other advocates so that they remove terminologies which are legally interpretive, so that people, whenever they hear at least friendly terminologies, they are able to get sense of health seeking instead of looking at themselves when they are struggling with emotional issues as criminals, when they are struggling with mental health challenges. And then also want to review and develop the suicidal response and suicidal attempt protocols. We have the Act in place, but it doesn't explain on who to respond. It only empowers people from the legal fraternity. So as such, we are looking at reviewing the Suicide Act and of course, put provisions to constitute a team that should be responsible in terms of response. Currently, we see only maybe the police officers, whenever there's a suicidal case, the people who first respond to such are police officers. And definitely when we see people like the police officers responding, a person will be perceived as a criminal or someone who has committed an offense. And as such, we need to review those responses and also develop protocols on how suicidal cases needs to be managed. And also we are intensifying community sensitization campaigns, that is in community education. We have a lot of myths and misconception about a person who is maybe having suicidal ideations or who attempts to take their own lives. Why? Because the community has very strong cultural beliefs emanating from the religious aspect of it. And even traditionally, any person who thinks of taking one's life, they are seen as maybe a weak vessels, or maybe they have done something which is against the religious standing, and of course, as a sin in the religious circles, all those. So community education also is very important because it will enlighten them to understand the processes of someone to reach a state of taking their own life. And also, we are also training media personnel on responsible media reporting. Currently, we are seeing media personnel reporting in comprehensively, even in methods, the way, maybe the position in which they found a person, if at all they used other means of taking their own lives. And that is of, we have seen that there's so much copycat, and people, particularly the young people, they are learning from such reporting that such methods also work. And as such, trainings are underway to empower the people in the media fraternity to also take that stance in taking part in prevention of suicide by responsible reporting. And then also we have a robust decentralization of mental health services, which will be readily available at their close doorsteps. So we are empowering primary healthcare levels to establish at least access points for anybody who feels they need emotional support and they need to visit their nearest health facility. We have also online services that can be called using toll-free lines. That is the Lifeline and other NGOs who are providing those services. And a person can really go and have someone or can be directed to where the services are. We also constitute a multi-sector response team, as I said. So whenever there's any case, it shouldn't be only police officers maybe responding to such. We want health personnel such as social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists, psychiatric nurses to be part and parcel of the team. And these people needs to be placed in a safe home. So we are working also with line ministries such as Ministry of Community Development, who are responsible for community well-being and the social support. And then also we are engaging with the traditional and religious and also civic leadership. We know this is where the community is, and the stigmatization and all myths and misconceptions that exists are all in our communities. And if the communities are not empowered or they are not capacity built with this information, definitely we will continue seeing suicide being a case or being a criminal act rather than maybe an outcome of many challenges someone may experience. Next slide. So in conclusion, I would say the Suicide Act of 1967 in Zambia signifies a progressive step towards acknowledging the significance of mental health and the complexity of surrounding suicide. but by itself, it's a shadow. Why? Because the implementation is very passive. What we are seeing in the general public is purely criminal response. For example, if the police responds to suicidal case, or maybe they are called upon to go and pick a body that has died by suicide, you find that the behaviors or maybe the acts they will do does not signify dignity to that body. Some of them, they are either slapped. Some of them, they're either maybe if they are in the hanging position, they will just cut without support and then that body will just fall. A lot of rituals which they may portray to the general public, and as such, the general public will pick it to say this person died as a criminal, and a lot of misconception will be left in that community. And we are seeing, as Prof. Johannes said, some burial rituals also does not give dignity to a person who dies by suicide. Why? Because they are perceived as weak vessels or they've died as a criminal. So in the context of the recent events involving suicide and suicidal attempts, it is essential to engage in constructive conversations about mental health and the role of the legal framework in protecting vulnerable individuals. While Suicide Act provides a framework for intervention, the responsibility to create a compassionate and supportive society extends to all of us, both offline and online. So there is also need to engage the religious, traditional, and civic leadership, line ministries or stakeholders and the health professionals to brief the true interpretation of the available evidence surrounding suicide. Professor Osafo, I learned a lot. I followed what Ghana has done, and it's really a model of approach that I think as Zambia, we are looking forward to learn from that, and definitely will reach out to that. Definitely we need evidence as more people are really in a dark to understand what suicide is, what comes out of suicide, or how suicide comes about, what are the risk factors, and how a person can reach an extent of taking their own lives. So I think in a nutshell, this is what Zambia is currently doing, and we really look forward to engage with a lot of other countries that have achieved. Ghana particularly, you are the model, as I indicated, that we, through those that are wonderful work, we can also accelerate to other countries that are still in the process of achieving what you have achieved.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Lungu, and thank you for sharing the Zambian experience, particularly the legal implications. There are a couple of comments on the chat, but they are comments, not really questions. I have a question. I mean, when I listen to you, Zambia, obviously, from what you've presented, does not criminalize. There is an act, but there are, from your presentation, apprehension there, but it's in the purview of the legal fraternity. So, does Zambia criminalize suicide or suicide attempts?
By virtue of the Suicide Act, we can simply say Zambia does not criminalize suicide. And in 2015, actually, when I was a student, we followed up to gather some information from the Zambia police itself. They totally denied, said, we are not recording suicidal cases here as they are not criminal acts. So hence, for sure, we are lacking maybe data in terms of where that information needs to be recorded. So by the virtue of this act and the chapter 89 of the laws of Zambia, suicide is not a criminal, but the behaviors that are being portrayed outside the act portrays the criminal response that we need to start working on, so that people start to understand what that information is interpreting from.
Thank you. There's a lot of congratulatory messages for you on the chat. But I think when you started your presentation and you said Zambia had independence and this act was enacted 3 years, which means Zambia responded immediately by having this act. That means there must have been a colonial act that does criminalize suicide. But thank you very much. I would move on, and there are a couple of questions, and I will encourage the audience to chime in with their questions on the chat. Our last presenter is Dr. Angeline Stevens. She's the manager of student support services in the College of Humanities at UKZN. Dr. Stevens, what are your
Is it just me or has Prof frozen?
It looks like Prof.
Maybe
frozen.
you can go ahead and talk because I think she was coming to you
Okay.
anyway, Angela.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Greetings, everyone. It's been a long afternoon, so thank you all for still being here. I'm going to share my screen, and if I can just get a thumbs up from everyone so that you can let me know that you can see my screen. Perfect. So as Prof has introduced, I'm based at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, so I'm essentially working in the area of student mental health. So although my talk is going to be framed within the higher education context, I want to emphasize that we can never speak about the higher education context in isolation of the other contexts that it interacts with, because it's part of that, in the very same way that we cannot speak about suicide in isolation as well. And we've heard previous presenters talking about how important it is to engage all stakeholders. And that is precisely because of the complexity of suicide, and because we have to, if we are going to tackle suicide, we're going to have to bring everyone on board. So while I am talking about the higher education context, I want to emphasize it's actually not about the higher education context only. A lot of my colleagues before me have already spoken about suicide in terms of risk factors, resilience, etc., what has been done. So what I want to do rather is to use a more critical lens in terms of what we need to be mindful of in our strategies, and when we think about what we want to achieve when we talk about suicide prevention. You know, when we think about suicide being a criminal offense, it's actually quite a horrific statement. But then I'm also here in South Africa, where it is not a criminal offense, but yet suicide is still shrouded in such a lot of shame and such a lot of judgment. And I ask myself the question, so why is that? So even though we might not have a law that says if you die by suicide, it is a criminal offense, it does not, we cannot make the assumption that everyone has the same understanding of suicide. So what I would like to do in this few minutes is really, again, just flag what are important issues to consider. The first critical area is to look at language. The language that we use, in fact, the language that we have been taught, we use the word commit suicide. So even if it's not a criminal offense in a country, we are already still continuing to frame a person's attempt to kill themselves or a person dying through suicide. We are already seeing it as something that's wrong. So as soon as we see something that's wrong, then we are essentially judging a person. And then by implication, we're saying that it is a personal choice, it is a selfish act. So instead of saying that, what we really need to be doing is focus on what has happened. And it's about stating it very matter-of-factly as a fact. Someone has attempted to kill themselves, or someone has died by suicide. The same way, when we talk about a successful suicide or a failed suicide, it conveys the idea of something being successful, all right? And so here again, it's linked to an idea of achievement or something positive, when in fact suicide is a really very tragic event. So someone reaches a point where death is the most viable option for them at that particular point. It's often we use words like epidemic, crisis, skyrocketing. The reality is that when we talk about suicide and we've looked at rates, it is a challenge. It is something that we need to apply our minds to. But when we use these words and not rely on evidence, for example, then there is we add to that panic. We add to almost sensationalizing it. So it's about keeping the focus on what is happening and why is it happening. And that would be position us in the best way to think about ways in which we can effectively work with the act of suicide. And likewise, finally, it's really not about describing a person as being suicidal, because then we come back to locating the problem with this person. And that is still very much a medical model approach to talking about suicide. And it's really the same trend that we want to move away when we talk about mental health generally. We want to rather talk about the experience that someone is going through. When we approach and use language that is less judgmental, that takes away the problem as being located in the person, that is when we can start opening ourselves up to being more compassionate, to being respectful. So we've been speaking about a person's dignity. It's about respecting a person. It's about being empathetic. It's about being compassionate. But when we also take away our lens from the person, inevitably we arrive at realizing, hold on, there are other contexts that are impacting, that's shaping what's happening here, that we have to look at. So those intersections, the complexity of suicide, then we start creating the space to start engaging on that level as well. The World Health Organization has already been cited, and in fact, this particular webinar has been framed with some statistics from there. So the second critical lens that I would like to focus on, that interventions and programs need to look at, is the aspect of gender. So we know it's been recorded. And mind you, the rates, the stats that we do have, they will always be problematic because not all deaths by suicide are recorded. And again, it's about the shame that is there. Many families would not report. They would say something else, give another reason. But why is it then that men are at a much higher rate, men engage, they either have thoughts about killing themselves or they do kill themselves? What does it say about our contexts? And here we have to think about the kinds of masculinities that society encourages. So traditional notions of masculinity encourage men and boys to be strong. And by being strong, it means there are certain other behaviors that are not so, that are seen as a weakness. So if I had to speak about what I'm going through, it's seen as a sign of weakness. So men and boys are encouraged to be more stoic, all right, to rely on themselves. So essentially the macho kind of masculinity that is promoted. And again, and Prof. Langba has mentioned this earlier on, and I'm glad he did. Suicide in itself is not mental health, mental illness, but there are mental challenges that can put a person more at risk. And we find that toxic masculinities, hegemonic masculinities, are ones that in fact do put men, especially those that do in fact aspire to those masculine ideals, more at risk. The point I want to also emphasize and flag here is, and we haven't actually spoken about sexuality at all. But if you look at the countries that do criminalize suicide, often those are also countries where there's very high levels of discrimination and oppression against certain marginalized groups. And those marginalized groups tend to be people who seem to deviate from what the norm is. So if you look at gender and you look at men, in addition to the masculinities that I've spoken about that could be problematic, it's also men who are sexually and gender non-conforming are even at an even higher risk for thinking about suicide or having suicidal thoughts as well. Keep in mind, I spoke about the context. If the context is going to be judgmental, people are not going to want to access those services as well. So when we think about suicide, we know that we said it's not about, it's not because of mental illness, but it should be framed within mental well-being. And it's already been mentioned, 15 to 29-year-olds, for example, tend to, persons in that particular age group, the rate of suicide is higher. Mind you, the rate of suicide is also high among much older people. And there are other reasons that can account for that, such as loneliness, such as an absence of support systems that might have been there. But perhaps one way of looking at suicide then, and what we could do, is to then have interventions that are very targeted. So when we say targeted, we're going to be looking at which groups then might be more at risk, all right? And what could we do then to prevent, firstly, an attempt? So prevent a person from attempting to kill themselves. And how do we give people information, enough information, so that they can be aware and recognize when they might need to access support, and they can know where to access the support. If we look around our context, that is happening. So we are failing somewhere else. And to a large extent, we fail because of the perceptions, all right? So a higher education institution does not operate separate from the communities within which it is located. Where levels of judgment is high, where there's still a high level of stigma, where we have very narrow definitions of what a person should be like, we find that those are going to be environments that are less supportive of people as well. So when we talk about targeted interventions, and I've given a couple of examples in a university context, such as first-year students, because they're transitioning, if they have difficulty making friends, etc. Students, like we said, who do have some kind of mental illness, we know depression has a very high rate. People who suffer from depression are more at risk to attempt to kill themselves. The same with someone who might be suffering from bipolar disorder. Students and persons who have a history of trauma. And again, I'm thinking about South Africa, but the African continent, where there are high levels of trauma, whether it is from a history of coloniality or current day violence, that we witness and we experience in our communities, in our homes, in our institutions. Any group, as I said, that is marginalized and is a target of discrimination. So think about, this is great because we are having conversations across the continent, but xenophobia is a reality as well in many of our contexts. And if we don't have the systems, and if our environments are not embracing of diversity, it makes it even more difficult to have conversations about mental well-being, and certainly about suicide prevention as well. So finally then, well, the point I'm making is that I think there are a lot of great programs around where we can give information. So, and that's often how we approach suicide. We talk about psychoeducation. What are the risk factors? What are the protective factors? There are tons of research on this. There's a wealth of information, but yet we still fail. And what I would like to propose is, unless we start engaging critically about the conditions that we are around us socially, and that means every one of us, the role that we play in the language that we use, do we discriminate against particular groups of persons? What is the general ethos? How embracing are we as a society and as an institution, as a nation, we are still going to be plagued with the issue of suicide risk, because we create in place systems that is alienating as well. So we really need to be looking at very practical ways in which we can become empathetic, in which we are empathetic. And we need to find then meaningful ways. So when we talk about human dignity, is how do we connect with the person? How do we see the person, not see a suicidal person, as I said, but you see a person, and we try to understand what are the experiences of that person and how can we support being with the person to move to a space that is safer, and that the person experiences as more gratifying. And so I want to end with a quote, African proverb that says, "Pretend you are dead and you will see who really loves you." And what that means for me, how I'm understanding it is, if we talk about an ethic of care and an ethic of compassion, what does it really look like? But I'm also toying with the idea of death. Are we also saying then, when a person does resort to death as the final option, is that the only time that we're saying is the viable time when we are going to be there to love and to care for a person? Thank you, everyone, for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stephen. I'm back. I froze for a minute, but thank you for this powerful presentation. The experience at the higher education level is certainly something that we can all learn from, especially for universities in South Africa and across the continent. And you know, I mean, you and I had responded. We have experience responding to a suicidal ideation and suicide attempt crisis as back as before COVID, and hopefully, you know, it didn't continue, but that students got the treatment that they desired and graduated. But I was really riveted by the statistics, you know, the countries that you had, and I'm not sure. Do you want to put that slide up in a minute? I think it's slide number 4. For the audience, we actually tried to get someone from the World Health Organization that deals with suicide statistics, but she had another engagement. She had agreed to be here with us to share some of the statistics. But
are you able to see it, Prof?
Yes. Yes. Another engagement, and she couldn't be here. But it's interesting, and thank you for sharing the statistics, especially for South Africa and a country that does not criminalize suicide. I'm not sure about Lesotho. I'm looking at the total suicide rates, which is high. I mean, forget about this disaggregation, male and female. And although in South Africa, we don't criminalize suicide, but it's really, really high. The rate there is per 100. I mean, so then you have South Korea, and a country like Guyana that recently also decriminalized. I mean, it's good you had it there. One of the countries, there are 3 countries that in the last, including Ghana now, that I've had, that since 2020 have decriminalized suicide. Guyana is one of them, Singapore, Pakistan, and I think India. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting, and what you said about, you know, inequalities and discrimination that are linked to some of these figures. Yes. But thank you very much for your time. I know we're going to take questions at the end, but you want to say something?
Yes. Sorry, Prof. I just want to add, I think, again, the point is making, because yes, this is, in fact, it showed very nicely how it doesn't matter if there isn't a law that criminalizes it. There's something else that's going on here. And we've had some questions, for example, talking about, you know, the education, what's happening in high schools, etc. We can't look at suicide just in terms of programs. It has to be, you've got to look at your curriculum, for example, what is taught, but just also how much the kinds of pressure we put children from grade R, you know, they take homework every day. So what is it that society, what are the conditions that promote thoughts of death as an option, as a viable option? Thanks, Prof.
Thank you. And I mean, it's good that you not really single out the Southern African countries, but look at Lesotho, that's leading the pack there, and Eswatini. These are very small countries. It'd be interesting for some of us as researchers to find out what are some of the, like what Professor Osafo is doing in Ghana, to find out what are some of the issues around, this high prevalence of suicide. But thank you very much. We have come to the end of the presentations from the panelists. But before I take questions from the panel, and we're going to read some of your questions on the chat. I've received the message from the Secretary General of the World Federation for Mental Health, Professor Gabriel Ivijaro, which we're going to play. I'm sure the colleagues and the technical team have that ready. I'll just read his bio, short bio. He's the current Secretary General of the World Federation for Mental Health and a specialist in integrated care and primary care mental health, with expertise in service redesign, and is past president of the World Federation for Mental Health, as I'd mentioned earlier on. He is an international distinguished fellow of the American Psychiatric Association, a Wango Fellow, has World Psychiatric Association honorary membership, and a member of the American College of Psychiatrists. So I also would like to, and I think I didn't do that, just read out the bio of the president himself. Dr. Nasser Loza is the president, is current president, 2021 to 2023 for the World Federation for Mental Health. He completed his psychiatric training at the Institute of Psychiatry and the Moseley Hospital in London. He's the founder and president of the Egyptian Society for the Rights of People with Mental Illness, and the director of the Berman Hospital, the Moody Psychology Center, and practices at several Berman consultation clinics in Cairo, as well as the International Clinic in London. That's Dr. Nessa Losa. Colleagues, can you play the message, if you don't mind, from the Secretary General, our own Nigerian British Secretary General?
Mental health is a universal human right. It's the theme for this year's World Mental Health Day. And I want to start by thanking everybody who has contributed to the WFMH in choosing this year's theme. I want to say a special thank you to the UN Secretary General for the call to action, reminding us that no one is immune against mental illness and nation states need to do more. The WHO Director General has also given a very clear message as what we need to do. We need to invest in community health services so that everybody can have access to excellent and good care. We have been very lucky to have many youth ambassadors all over the world, over 1,000 of them, who are helping us to amplify our messages. I'm also very grateful to Decca Record Company and the record ambassadors who are helping us to spread the news. We cannot do it alone. We need every citizen of the world to join us. The WFMH has developed 3 pillars of advocacy. One advocacy focusing on government, and that one focusing on leadership and professionals, and the third most important one on citizens and other NGOs. We are going to do a lot to improve the language we use for mental health if we are truly going to achieve what we want. And as to this effect, we're going to be focusing on psychological first aid as one of the great tools to kind of use a language that accepting and allowing us to be able to feel and speak as we feel. And we will be starting with very young people. And I once more thank each and every one of you for what you have done. Let us continue to do this work. There's still a lot to be done, and I know together we can make a true difference. Thank you, and enjoy the day, and let us share your activities. Go to our website and show what you have been doing. Thank you, and thank you very much.
Yeah, I would like to go on record by thanking the Secretary General for this message. Like you said, the World Federation for Mental Health is celebrating 75th anniversary, and there is a whole campaign till the end of the year just promoting mental health and mental health awareness. WFMH is a member organization. You all, you don't need to be a psychiatrist or a mental health professional. Anybody can become a member of this organization. So I encourage you all to visit the website and become a member, because mental health is everyone's business, and there is no health without mental health. Thank you very much. We can now open for questions, and for the panelists, or questions even for myself. Let's see. Let's start with verbal questions. If you have a question for the panelists, you can raise your hand whilst we collate the chats and see which of the questions, which of the input there is a question and not just a comment. So you can raise your virtual hand, and then we'll take you in turn. One. But whilst we are waiting, I just want to take this opportunity to thank, as you agree with me that we have some very powerful presentation. I think all of the participants are experts in their field, and we have benefited a lot and learned a lot about this very important and thorny issue that we are confronted in Africa. There's a new message. Let's see. Or someone is just greeting us. And there's a thank you very much.
Prof, there are no hands or new messages. I think we can wrap up.
We can wrap up, right?
Yeah, sure.
So there, I would like to take this opportunity to wrap up and give the panelists one round of comment, final continued thoughts, 1 minute, if you don't mind. If you have, you can just raise your hand and it will take you guys in turn. Final thoughts from the panelists. Professor Osafo.
I missed that question. Could you?
Oh, no, I was just saying, there are no questions, but I want to give the panelists an opportunity to give thoughts. Right. If you have any final statements.
Yes.
Or messages.
So first and foremost, I want to say thank you very much for Professor John Lamba and your team for putting this together. It helps us to reflect on our own context and then to ask critical questions as to the way forward. How do we push suicide prevention to the next level, especially the need for gathering our own data, the need for looking at contextual issues, the need to look into our culture, and then the risk factors that are embedded in particular cultural forms that we haven't paid attention to. But not only that, secondly, also the need to look at the dividends, the strengths in our culture, and what can be harnessed from our cultural practices, beliefs, and values. It's not about just looking at what problems cultural practices and rituals present, but what are the dividends, what are the strengths? And I think that we have a lot of strengths. And then last but one, that suicide prevention efforts in Africa must be a serious issue, considering the demographic peculiarity of the African continent. We have a lot of young people. As the youngest continent, a lot of things are happening. And so our young people are exposed to the conditions of living anyhow and exposed to the dangers and the difficulties as they grow. And so we need to pick up this seriously. And then finally, that this is a time for Africa to show what I believe that we have a lot of, if you like, cultural resources within our own setting that we can leverage on and push suicide prevention to the highest level that we can. Thank you very much, and God bless all of you. Please, our organization is Partnership for Life. It is, as I say, IASP, International Association of Suicide Prevention Initiative. I put my email in there. Please, let's relate It is to organize the Africa region to tell our own story and co-learn so that we can push suicide prevention to the next level. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think that covers, everything that the other panelists might have wanted to say. But there is a question here. I think I before we wrap, and colleagues, just bear with me. I think it's something that's really specific, not just. I think in South Africa, Sitabile is asking, how can we change the policy for the funeral cover persons who commit suicide? It's discrimination, and it's unfair to the family members, the surviving family members. Do you have that kind of experience in Ghana?
Yes, so in Ghana, it's rather selected. It's more of the security apparatuses, so the military and the police. I think there is also something like that for the fire service. But in terms of the general public or anybody who works in any, civil servant and public servant, no, not necessarily. So what actually happens is that people cover up. There's a case I saw recently. The person died, killed himself, and then I knew it because somebody had just alerted me. So when I called someone to say, what do we do? How do we help? He said, oh, no, the family would want to keep it cool. They don't want anybody to know. So there's a lot of covering so that you can organize a funeral that can attract a number of people to pay what we call in Ghana a condolence fee. That is just like a fee to support the funeral. If you are noted to have killed yourself, you lose that. So nobody wants to say, well, he killed himself. Then nobody attends the funeral and you don't get a condolence fee. So
thank you. And again, actually the question was, and it's good you brought that up in our African context where we all pay the condolence fee, and it's interesting to note that people will not go to the funeral and they will not sympathize by paying. But what she was asking in South Africa is about life insurance.
Okay.
Have life insurance and insurance companies will not pay if it's suicide and they don't put it in the policy.
Okay. Right.
Yeah. But it's good. That's why we're having these webinars, so we learn from each other. If there are no questions and any of the panelists want to say one word, it's an opportunity. Otherwise, we'll wrap up. I know we are over time. Again, thank you very much. I would like to thank especially UKZN, the Director of Corporate Relations team, for working behind the scenes and making this possible, the technical aspect. And thank you to all the panelists for taking time off your busy schedule to be here with us. I think we've learned a lot. We'll get the presentation. This is going to be recorded. We'll share it with all the participants. The PowerPoint, especially Prof, your PowerPoint, I think a lot of the participants would love to have that and learn from it. I also thank our volunteers, the World Federation for Mental Health. We had two volunteers, Ms. Babalwa Dano and Ms. Vitasha Sukudu, who have been communicated with the panelists. But thank you very, very much. And thank you everyone for participating. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.